This video is sponsored by War Thunder. Play War Thunder for free and get a premium aircraft, tank, or ship and a 3-day account upgrade as a bonus. It's available on PC, PS4, and Xbox One. More on them in a bit. World War I will be remembered as one of the bloodiest wars in human history. Millions of soldiers died on both sides, and whole generations of young men were wiped out. Armies were bogged down in impenetrable trenches, resulting in thousands dying in futile assaults against fortified enemies. The war also introduced new and terrible weapons, such as the machine gun, which made the war even more horrific and bloody. There are many terrible battles, but this is a list of the worst. Number 10. The Battle of Tannenberg, 182,000 total casualties. Following the failed Russian invasion of East Prussia, the Russians managed to inflict a defeat on the Germans at Gumbinnen and make a push towards the west. The Germans quickly moved to consolidate the German Eighth Army to halt the Russian advance. Despite being outnumbered, the Germans, outnumbered by 2 Russian field armies, managed to inflict a huge defeat on the Russians at Tannenberg. This is considered by some to be the most lopsided defeat in the war. The Russians suffered 170,000 casualties to the Germans' 12,000. It highlighted the ineptitude of the Russian commanders and the ineffectiveness of the Russian army. Number 9. Battle of Arras, 278,000 total casualties. By 1917, the Western Front had been a stalemate for 2 years. Many bloody battles, including the slaughterhouses at Verdun and the Somme, had resulted in millions of casualties on both sides, and Europe was growing weary of the war. The Allied High Command needed to break the German lines in advance. The German army was by now numerically inferior, and a solid victory breaking the German lines could easily end the war. As a result, a plan was formed to assault the German trenches at the town of Arras, which, combined with a French assault to the south, was hoped would finally break the deadlock on the Western Front and bring about an Allied victory. The Battle of Arras opened on the 9th of April 1917, and initial efforts led to the capture of the strategically important Vimy Ridge by Canadian forces and to major gains by British forces in the centre. However, when the battle closed on the 16th of May 1917, the British advance had been halted. Although tactically a British victory, the battle did not result in the hoped-for breakthrough and was ultimately indecisive. The British lost 158,000 casualties in the assault, to a German loss of 120,000. Number 8. The Battle of Gallipoli, 433,000 total casualties. By 1915, the war in the West had bogged down. Both sides had constructed massive trench networks and were losing men in futile assaults against the fortified positions. Additionally, the shocking defeat at Tannenberg had put Russia's back to the wall, risking the Allies losing a valuable contributor to the war effort. With the casualties mounting, the Allies decided on a gamble: open up a second front. So Winston Churchill, then the First Lord of the Admiralty, decided on an attack on the Dardanelles in modern-day Turkey to threaten the Ottoman capital of Constantinople. The Allies hoped the Second Front would help break the deadlock on the Western Front and bring relief to the beleaguered Russians by opening up a sea route for resupply. When initial naval attacks failed, the Allies decided on an amphibious assault to crush the Ottoman army. The Allies believed that the Turks would simply fold up and collapse with minimal casualties. The Ottoman Empire was called the sick man of Europe in that time and was viewed as being weak. However, exactly the opposite happened. The Turkish troops dug in and resisted, stymieing the Allied landings. The result of this, along with poor planning on the part of Allied commanders, was that the Allied troops were bogged down on the beaches and failed to achieve their objectives, and the Gallipoli front eventually bogged down into the same trench warfare as seen on the Western Front, as British, Australian, and New Zealand forces clashed with the Turks, trying to break out of their beachheads. The Allies ended up losing 220,000 men to the Turks' 253,000, and the Ottoman Empire earned a stunning victory. As a side note here, the Gallipoli campaign is said to be the time when the Australians and the New Zealanders started to see themselves as a separate and unique country from Britain, coming from stories of the bravery of the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps. Number 7. First Battle of the Marne, 483,000 total casualties. In early September 1914, the German army had overrun Belgium and was pushing through France, threatening Paris. British and French forces had already taken heavy casualties trying to stop the Germans, and it seemed that Paris would fall to the German forces. Desperate to stop the German advance, British and French forces consolidated on the Marne River just outside Paris. The Allies were finally able to halt the German push into France in a counterattack against the Germans by 6 French field armies and 1 British army, causing heavy casualties to the German army and forcing them to abandon the Schlieffen Plan and retreat. Despite the Allied victory, the battle was a costly one. The Allied forces suffered 263,000 casualties and the Germans 220,000. Also, the battle forced the Germans to retreat and then consolidate and begin building fortifications, causing the Allies to respond and leading to the bloody trench warfare that would characterize the Western Front. Number 6. Serbian Campaign. 633,500 plus total casualties. Just about every schoolchild knows that World War I started when Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary, was assassinated by Serbian nationalist Gavrilo Princip. They also know that shortly thereafter, Austria-Hungary invaded Serbia, causing the Russians to declare war on Austria-Hungary, and then the Germans to declare war on Russia, and then so on and so forth. The Serbian campaign opens with the Austrian shelling of Belgrade on July the 29th, 1914, followed by the military invasion of Serbia on August the 12th. Despite being outnumbered, the Serbians managed to blunt the Austrian invasion for most of 1914 and into 1915, when the Germans and Bulgarians joined the Austrians in the effort to conquer Serbia and launched a new offensive, culminating in the Battle of Kosovo in November and December of 1915, where the Serbian army was finally broken and Serbia crushed. The campaign was horrendously bloody for both sides, with the Austrians, Germans, and Bulgarians losing a combined 313,500 casualties, and the Serbians losing over 320,000. Now, real-life war is pretty miserable, as you are seeing from this video, but with today's sponsor, War Thunder, you can play at war with, none of the real-life death and horror. War Thunder is a realistic free-to-play military vehicle combat game. In this game, there are over 1,500 historically accurate vehicles, all the way from the 1920s to the 1990s. They're all carefully built and incredibly detailed, and all of the physics has been really sweated over. It's very, very good, and the sound is also super immersive. You can play this game on PC, Xbox One, PS4, and you can just jump in for a quick arcade game, useful if you don't have much time, or you can play realistic and go for some more challenging stuff, or if you're hardcore, go for simulator, but yeah, you're probably going to get beaten in that one. So join us on the battlefield for free using the link below. Doing that supports the show, and you also get a free premium tank, ship, or aircraft, and 3 days of premium time as a bonus for registering. And let's get into the rest of today's video. Number 5. Battle of Passchendaele. 848,614 total casualties estimated. This battle, fought from July to November of 1917, has come to be synonymous with the grinding and bloody misery of trench warfare during World War I. Also known as the Third Battle of Ypres, the main aim of this battle was to break through at the villages of Passchendaele in West Flanders, Belgium, and outflank and beat back the German army. In a series of bite-and-hold operations against the German lines, the Allies sought to wear down the Germans through bloody attrition warfare, culminating in the Canadian Corps taking control of Passchendaele on November 6, 1917, ending the battle. The conditions during the battle were miserable. Both sides suffered horrific casualties, with the British gaining only slender territorial gains for their efforts. Mud was a constant feature of the shot-up landscape, bogging down tanks and even drowning men. British Prime Minister at the time, David Lloyd George, used the battle as an example of senseless waste and bad generalship. The Allies lost a total of 448,614 men to the Germans' 400,000. Number 4. Battle of Verdun. 976,000 total casualties. As the Battle of the Somme was being planned, the Germans staged a massive attack against the French fortress near the town of Verdun-sur-Meuse. Although the German goal was to capture the town, a much simpler one was even more apparent. Simply kill so many French soldiers that it would break the French morale and force them to abandon the fight. The French, though, stubbornly defended Verdun and inflicted horrific casualties on the Germans while suffering horrific casualties of their own in return. Nearly 40 million artillery shells were exchanged during the battle, pockmarking the area with craters, some of which are still visible to this day, and popularized the French battle cry of "They shall not pass." Verdun came to be for the French and Germans what the Somme was for the British, a symbol of the horrors of war in general and of the futility of World War I. The French lost some 542,000 casualties, while the Germans lost some 435,000. Number 3. Battle of the Somme. 1,219,201 total casualties. One of the two great slaughterhouse battles of World War I, the Somme still rings in the minds of the British as an example of the senseless slaughters of the war. Planned in 1916, the goal of the battle was to be a massive Anglo-French effort to create a rupture in the German lines that could be exploited with a decisive blow. The German attack on Verdun, however, forced the Allied commanders to change their plans, and the battle became a primarily British offensive, though the French still contributed significantly. The British prepared for the offensive with a massive several-day artillery barrage on the German lines, which they hoped would damage the German defences enough to allow British forces to break through. On the opening day of the battle, they learned that, in fact, it had failed to do so when the British suffered 60,000 casualties in a single day, the greatest single loss of life in the history of the British Army. Attacks continued all along the Somme area until November 13th, 1916, when the offensive finally petered out. The battle, though ultimately indecisive as there was no breakthrough, was strategically important to the Allies as it forced the Germans to withdraw 40 miles and later set the stage for the final Allied victory in 1918. The Allies paid for it dearly, however. The Allies lost a total of 623,906 casualties, including 100 tanks and 782 aircraft. The Germans lost 600,000 men. Number 2. Spring Offensive. 1,539,715 total casualties. Also known as the Ludendorff Offensive or the Kaiserschlacht, Kaiser's Battle, the Spring Offensive was launched, as its name suggests, in the spring of 1918. Germany's back was against the wall. The country was suffering from a British blockade of its ports, and it had lost so many men that the German army was having to recruit old men and young boys to fight on the front lines. In addition, the arrival of thousands of fresh troops from the United States was paving the way for a certain Allied victory. The German High Command knew that the only way to win the war was to defeat the Allies with a major offensive before the Americans could be fully deployed. German General Erich Ludendorff was chosen to plan the offensive, which was launched on the 21st of May 1918. The plan was for a major push against the Somme front held by the British, with 3 other attacks intended to divert Allied attention from the main push. It was hoped the attack against the Somme would break the Allied lines, breaking the British army and forcing the Allies to seek armistice terms. Using fast-moving stormtroopers, the Germans initially made significant advances, pushing the Allies back and gaining a huge chunk of land in World War I terms. However, the operation lacked clear goals, and the Germans ended up moving so fast that they were unable to transport enough supplies to maintain it. Also, they failed to provide fast-moving units such as cavalry to exploit their gains. The Allies eventually dug in and halted the German advance, ending the offensive with the Germans in a weak position to defend when the final push of the war was made. The Germans lost over 680,000 casualties in the push, mostly to stormtrooper units leading the assaults. The Allies combined lost a total of 850,000 people. The attack failed in its goal to break the Allied forces, and combined with fresh American troops, the Allies were ready to make the final assault against the Germans. Number 1. 100 Days Offensive. 1,855,369 total casualties. With the failure of the Spring Offensive, the Germans were left in a weak position, having gained grounds that could not adequately be defended, and having spent most of their best troops trying to break the Allied lines. The Allies, on the other hand, were battered but not broken, and had the advantage of thousands of fresh troops from the United States under the command of General John Blackjack Pershing. The Allied Supreme Commander at the time, Marshal Ferdinand Foch, decided that the Allies should go back on the offensive and agreed to a plan proposed by British commander Sir Douglas Haig to attack the weakened German Second Army at Amiens. The attack, also known as the Battle of Amiens, was a success, forcing the Germans to eventually abandon the line at Amiens. The Allies launched another series of offensives, including the Battle of Second Somme, Second Nyons, and Second Arras. The result was a spectacular success. The German lines were eventually broken, and the Germans were forced to retreat back to the Hindenburg Line, a series of defensive works protecting the German homeland. The Allies then started attacking the line with a series of offensives directed at achieving a final breakthrough. The weakened, exhausted Germans put up a fight, but were unable to defend the lines, and eventually the Allies broke through the Hindenburg Line at the Battle of Cambrai. The Germans eventually sued for peace, and an armistice was signed on the 11th of November 1918, bringing the bloody battles of World War I to an end. The 100 Days Offensive was a spectacular success for the Allies, but they paid for it dearly. The The Allies lost a total of 1,069,636 casualties, including 127,000 Americans. The Germans lost 785,733 casualties, but perhaps the greatest loss was the collapse of the German Empire and the crushing peace terms the Germans were later forced to accept. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below and do not forget to subscribe. Brand new videos just like this every day of the week. For more from me, why not subscribe to another channel I do called Geographics? We often touch on historical events, so I think if you enjoyed this video, you'll enjoy that channel. It's linked to below, and thank you for watching.